Hello everybody and welcome back to the HLTCO YouTube channel. The subject of today's video is actually Aston Villa and the start to the season they have made under Unai Emery's guidance, as well as the back end of last season when they of course stormed their way up the Premier League table, managed to finish in a European place and have now played the first leg of that European qualifier for the UEFA Conference against Hibernian, come out 5-0 winners, and it looks to be something of a foregone conclusion that they will make it through in that second leg at Villa Park, make it into the group stage of the UEFA Conference, and then, given the pedigree that Unai Emery, their coach, has in different European competitions across multiple clubs, you would imagine they had to be put up there amongst the favourites to go on and lift that trophy at the back end of this season, emulating potentially what David Moyes and the Hammers managed to do in Prague at the end of the 22-23 campaign. The reason for me touching upon Aston Villa specifically today is that I think they are a genuinely interesting prospect, and somehow they still seem to be flying somewhat under the radar when it comes to your general football fans' perception of exactly where they find themselves in the Premier League's hierarchy, because of course the narrative media-wise will always be dominated by your bigger clubs, your Liverpools, your Manchester Uniteds, Man City. You've of course got the narrative that surrounds Newcastle United now with the Saudi Public Investment Fund and the amount of money that they have ploughed into that project over the last 12 to 18 months. But Aston Villa are a very, very interesting prospect, not just on the pitch and with Unai Emery in the dugout, but also in terms of the financial muscle they have behind the scenes now. And as much as it is, a subject of public knowledge, sometimes, I have conversations online with people about Aston Villa, not Aston Villa fans, but neutrals that will have conversations about football generally, and there still seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in terms of people understanding quite how solid they are in terms of their financial footing. They have two principal owners at Aston Villa, Nassef Sawiris and Wes Edens. That makes up a ownership model which between them, I believe, are worth just under £10 billion, which is a quite mind-boggling amount of money. But of course, across the Premier League you have billionaire owners and those that are able to have, incredibly deep pockets to dip into. I think the difference here is that in both of the individuals just named, you've got a real desire to try and push Aston Villa up that footballing pecking order. And in Unai Emery, they have gone out and got a coach who, for my money, was somewhat typecast during his spell as Arsenal boss. It's sort of a subject, not that's been done to death now, but it's certainly a subject which has had multiple videos like this dedicated to it and multiple column inches. But I always felt as though the way that Unai Emery was perceived when he first arrived in England to take over that Arsenal job was reductive, it was jingoistic, and it was narrow in the way that people perceived him. You look at his career as a manager, he has worked in some fantastic places and had genuine success pretty much everywhere he's been other than that Arsenal role. And it was always my view that following on from Arsene Wenger was going to be a very, very difficult task. I think he, had to fill some gigantic shoes there. I think you can make parallels between David Moyes going in at Manchester United with Sir Alex Ferguson when he departed and how difficult that was for the Scotsman. And of course, he has now rebuilt his reputation and he's doing fantastic things with West Ham, albeit not maybe in the same sort of flourishing style that you would have expected at Manchester United. But in Unai Emery, I always felt Arsenal had a coach who was the right man at the wrong time. And, I still believe that in my core. He has had incredible success in European competitions, principally with the likes of Sevilla, with Villarreal, and now going to Aston Villa. I think there is a real desire from their ownership model to turn them into a genuine powerhouse. And of course you are playing with something of a loaded deck, given the size of your Manchester Uniteds, your Liverpools, your Arsenals, and the Manchester City project, the Newcastle Saudi Public Investment Fund. It's a very clouded and busy field. You can throw Chelsea into that picture, you can throw Tottenham into that picture, but Aston Villa to me seem like a club who have genuine ambition behind the strides that they've made over the last 12 months. And in Unai Emery, I think they've got a coach who is incredibly tactically astute and someone who will really help Aston Villa to grow both on and off the pitch across the next 18 to 24 months. The fact they've got into European competition was something which I think, every Aston Villa fan, including Unai Emery himself in the dugout, wasn't expecting when he first took that role. But the run of form they had under him at the back end of last season was quite mind-boggling, if truth be told. And just to break it down into actual tangible numbers here. He has managed 31 games with Aston Villa. This is as per Wikipedia today. 18 of those games have ended up in victories, 4 draws and just 9 defeats for a win percentage of 58.06. And across his entire managerial career with Villarreal, with Arsenal, with PSG, with Sevilla, Spartak Moscow, Valencia, Almeria and Lorca Deportivo, the win percentage was only bettered at PSG, and of course you would expect that with the Parisian Giants having such a stranglehold at the top of the French game. And of course you can expect there to be a levelling out across the next 12 to 18 months, but I think it really speaks to the solid foundations that exist at Villa Park now in terms of that squad, in terms of the players that they brought in across this summer, and the way that those players that were already there seem to have really bought into what Unai Emery wants. You know, yesterday's performance away at Burnley, you could look at it as a tick box exercise. You've got a newly promoted side under Vincent Kompany. They've had their game last week postponed against Luton. They had the Premier League curtain raiser at home to Manchester City, which of course they lost, and no one was expecting anything else. But a game at home to Aston Villa, say 18 months ago, would have been looked upon as a winnable game. And yet I think I speak for most people here. When I saw Aston Villa going to Burnley, I fully expected them to grind out the 3 points in pretty comfortable fashion. That's exactly what they managed to do. And those potential banana skins seem to be navigated with relative ease at the moment by this Villa squad. And I think you can put a great deal down to the tactical preparation that Unai Emery has brought to the Aston Villa team as a collective. And the fact that you can really see the solid groundwork that has been going into this squad across the summer. As soon as he arrived, pretty much their level went up a gear or two. And if you actually look at the business they have done across this summer window, Moussa Diaby has come in from Bayer Leverkusen for €55 million. He of course scored against Newcastle in that victory at the beginning of the season. He also managed to grab a goal against Burnley yesterday, a fantastic finish low into the far corner past James Trafford. You've got Pau Torres, who's come in for €33 million from Villarreal, having previously worked with Unai Emery, of course, an extremely experienced defender, just 26 years old, so very much in his prime at the moment. You've got Nicolo Zaniolo, who has come in as an attacking midfielder from Galatasaray. Once again, a player who has genuine pedigree in the game, and as soon as he made that move to Villa Park, I think eyebrows were raised, and quite rightly so. And then you throw in Yuri again. I'm not going to edit that out, I'm just going to roll with it. Yuri Tielemans has come in on a free transfer from Leicester as well, another extremely talented and dependable player who can sit there at the core of Aston Villa's spine and be a really useful player for Unai Emery and Aston Villa across the next 2 or 3 years. And this is my overarching point really, is that you often, or at least I do, look at Premier League managers now, and you can look at the shelf life of a football club with a man in charge and think really you're doing well to get 12 to 18 months out of them. But I think in both Aston Villa and Tottenham Hotspur's cases, they've got exactly the right man at exactly the right time for the direction that they are heading in the sense of a fan base who have experienced boom and bust football. In Aston Villa's case specifically, they have had relegations in their relatively recent history. There was the high profile saga that saw Jack Grealish go to Manchester City for an incredible amount of money, and they have been searching for an anchor to build around. And in Unai Emery, they've got an extremely solid tactical mind who seems to be having his ambitions met perfectly by a football club that want to be a disruptor. Now you can look at the likes of Newcastle, Brighton, Brentford even, as, clubs who, in albeit different vehicles, are disrupting the top of the table. But it really does feel to me as though Aston Villa's plan is a rock solid one. There is money behind this to try and extend Villa Park. The fan base is absolutely ginormous. I just feel as though they are a football club that are getting a hell of a lot of things right at the moment. And of course they went down the Steven Gerrard route. That did not work. I think there was real hope when he first arrived that they would go up a gear or two and he would really have that winning mentality installed within them. Obviously, the initial signs of his managerial career at Rangers gave the impression that he was a manager that was going to be there at the top of the game for the long term. That proved not to be the case, but they have made sure with Unai Emery that they have backed him in as tangible way as possible with these players that have come in, with the squad ethos being what it is. And it really feels as though fans, owners, coaches, manager, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet at the moment. And, it pains me to say it, but I would imagine that Brighton will be there or thereabouts in terms of European qualification once again this season, and I would fully and comfortably put Aston Villa in that same bracket. I don't think you're going to see that much of a significant drop-off in their domestic form just because they happen to be competing in European competition as well, because I think that group, with the additions that they've had made to them across this summer and with the tactical acumen of Unai Emery and his coaching staff, will be more than good enough to be there or thereabouts in 6th or 7th place. And it does make that archetypal Big Six conversation a far more difficult one to navigate now. You know, you've got 4 or 5 places actually for the Champions League this season, but just because you would expect Chelsea with the money they've spent to be there, just because you would expect Liverpool to be there, I don't think it's a guarantee anymore. You know, you have to throw Newcastle in as a disruptor, you have to throw Brighton in, and I think realistically in terms of 5th or 6th place, you could easily make a case that Aston Villa can be amongst that number. So it really does feel to me now as though the Premier League is almost not a top 10 and a bottom 10 cut and dried, but there are certainly clubs, 2 or 3 of them, and Aston Villa are firmly amongst that pack, who are making significant strides forward in terms of their entire infrastructure, in terms of the way they are going about things. And I just think it's very, very interesting, because the Premier League for a great number of years had 2 or 3 teams at the top that would, you know, expect to be there or thereabouts in terms of a title race, and you would have quite a sizable number that would be looking over their shoulders at a potential relegation battle every single year. And I do honestly believe that the likes of your Aston Villas, your Brightons, your Brentfords, they've already stepped out of that initial conversation about relegation. I just can't see a scenario in which Aston Villa are even remotely bothered about having to look over their shoulders. And it does create not an us and them thing, but it's a blueprint for Aston Villa to really kick on, because if they can get European football 3 or 4 years on the spin, the quality of players they can attract, the size of their fan base, the size of the stadium, it all just points towards a football club that are really going places. And when you have an ownership structure that has £10 billion to spend, or at least £10 billion sitting there as a war chest to, you know, bring about changes to the academy, to the training ground, to the stadium, it really does make Aston Villa a sleeping giant is an overused phrase, but a club that can be a mover and a shaker in the top half of the table. So if I was an Aston Villa fan, I would be over the moon with the general direction of the football club at the moment. And I appreciate this video isn't telling them anything new, but I do genuinely think that when you have conversations with your everyday man or woman in the street that follows football, if they're not directly plugged into what is going on at Aston Villa at the moment, it would be very easy to just assume they are on a purple patch of form with a relatively new coach in Unai Emery, and you could expect a levelling off. I'm not sure that is going to be the case. You know, I would have Aston Villa down at the very lowest to finish 9th this season. I don't think there's any danger of them being in the bottom half because of the quality of their squad, because of how well drilled they are tactically, and because in Unai Emery they have a man who has been there, seen it and done it in terms of navigating his way through European competitions while still remaining competitive on a domestic front. And I just think with all of that in mind, they are an absolute lock for a top 8 or 9 place, if not once again qualifying for Europe, despite the fact that they will be having the logistical nightmare of travelling all over the continent. And, you know, it may well end up, and I don't think it's outlandish to suggest it, given the quality of their squad in comparison to the rest of the UEFA Conference, with them in a quarter-final, semi-final, potentially even going all the way and emulating, as I just mentioned, what David Moyes and the Hammers were able to do in Prague at the back end of the previous campaign. And if, of course, Unai Emery manages to win a European trophy again with Aston Villa, then he would have to be put up there as one of the true greats when it comes to European success, given what he did with Sevilla, given what he did with Villarreal, and given what it looks like he is capable of doing now that he is in charge of Aston Villa with that level of backing behind him. So hopefully you've found this video relatively informative and enjoyable. You know, as I say, it's nothing new to Aston Villa fans, but I just wanted to shine a light on it really, because I think they are on a very, very solid footing at the moment, and it's only going to get better for them if they carry along that same pathway. So if you have enjoyed it, please do consider giving the video a like and pushing that subscribe button. I also do record those football podcasts every day, Monday to Friday. That is £3 a month, delivered straight to your inbox by 8:30 AM. It's a complete roundup of everything that has gone on in the previous 24 hours. There is also a Palace podcast that I record Monday to Friday, giving you everything that is going on specifically with Crystal Palace inside 25 minutes. That is also £3 a month, or you can get the combo for £4.50 should you be so inclined. If you do want to do that, it would be doing me a massive favour, and every single subscriber without putting too fine a point on it is huge for me. If you just want to continue enjoying these YouTube videos, that's absolutely fine. But as I say, if you could push that subscribe button and give this video a like, I would be very, very grateful. Other than that, I will sign off there for today and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.